If you're still having issues navigating around Arma, even with the last 2 videos I've posted with how to find your exact location and how to place the command move mark so you can know where you're going, this is probably going to be the most useful video for you today. Using the compass and protractor to find your exact location is beneficial, but it's seldomly used by people while they're actually playing this game. The command move mark is probably the most useful, but if you're in a car, you're going to have to typically follow the roads, so it doesn't really help you as much as you think it would. The command move really only helps people who are traversing through a field or forest on foot, or just going as a crow flies to an objective, and things that fly as crows or helicopters. But with all the tips I've given so far, there's one thing I haven't really talked about yet, and that is the in-game map. Being able to navigate effectively heavily relies on map knowledge. Map knowledge can be defined by knowing how to read the map, knowing the geological features of the map, being able to follow roads, knowing the man-made structures of the map, taking landmarks you see in-game and correlating them to the map, and if you're really trying to win games, the tactical advantage of controlling certain sections of the map. Now, when I say map knowledge, I don't necessarily mean being able to read the map, but being able to read the map is how you get map knowledge. In order to climb this skill curve that is map knowledge, you need to know what you're correlating with what you're seeing. So, for example, let's say you spawn here and you see this church, a coastline. We'll take a little 360 here to get more information. A coast over there with a ridge going all the way up to a very high hill with buildings all through here and also forests over there. I can sit here and say, all right, there's a church, there's a coast, there's a military installation over there. So then you could open up your map and look, okay, where are churches on the coast? And then let's say eventually you get to Morton and you see the church here. And you say, hey, this is a coast, there's a military installation, a harbor, here's a coastline here, hill, going all the way up to top of a mountain. I know right where I am. I'm right in front of this church. So that is getting map knowledge, and being able to do that while you're traversing is navigating. And if I'm going to make a video about the map, I need to talk about the grid that represents this whole thing. And to get it from the words of Bohemia, I'm going to go into the field manual, which is right here, down to navigation, and over to map. So I'm just going to read this word for word because they put it very well. Military maps are topographic representations of land and features. In most cases, they're divided into grids by vertical and horizontal lines known as eastings and northings. Positions can be read and communicated by combining the values of any easting and northing. So with that being read, let's put that into practice. So with eastings and northings, I just like to call them X and Y because X is your east and west and Y is your north and south as it pertains to a map. With that being said, in order to find the XY coordinates of Lamenton, you would first go X, which is 1, and then you would go Y, which is 5. So Lamenton is technically in 1, 5, X, Y coordinate. So you would start with the X and with the Y. Now, if I were to go to the northern half of Lamenton here, that would be 0, 1, 0, 6. So that would be this grid square. And as you zoom in more, you can get more specific. There's another set of grid squares that pop up once you get down to a certain distance here. And you would read them the exact same as you would if it was zoomed out, but you have one more number there to represent this grid square. So this gas station, really quick, is 016057. That is this grid square. So if you watched my previous video on using a compass and a protractor, you're familiar with this location. I'm not going to go through the whole compass and protractor thing again, but I am going to just draw a very rough X here to kind of give a representation of where I am. Let's say hypothetically I took the azimuth reading of both of these and used a protractor and a pen to find my exact location. Not sure if this is right. I think I'm actually over here a little bit more, but either way. So to utilize the X, Y, and the grid coordinates for a heli pickup, you would probably radio into 48 or to the helicopter pilot and say, I'm at 070090, and they would know to come right here to this spot. So I'm just going to hop in with number 1. And that is understanding the geological features. I feel the most prominent geological area is this southeastern peninsula here, because you have this whole mountain range on the east, northeast, and then you have this southwestern mountain range with a massive valley in the middle. If you're this zoomed out of the map, you really don't see much aside from the highway and key named locations. And if you really look in there, you can see the geographical locations like ridges and massive ones like that. So to understand the map, you actually have to get boots on ground and look around and correlate with what you're seeing in game with what is reading on the map. If I'm zoomed in this much, you can see these lines that are kind of rolling on this ridge, and they come up and peak right at the peak of that ridge and then come down. These lines represent a change in elevation. The closer they get together, the more drastic of a drop. So down here, this is a cliff. Over here, this is a gradual slope. Now, why being able to read these is important is, let's say you're moving to a location that has a hill in between it. So Simon's Wood is on a hill. If you're here, you know there's that hill there, and then you go up to the hill, and then you can go directly through it to get to Fagari. With a tactical point, you can use hills and valleys and all that to help you win gunfights, and that's all under positioning within a gunfight, and I'll go over all that later on. For now, we're just trying to learn how to navigate. So let's reset back here in the valley. So you've got these lines here that are evenly spread out, and they get a little bit closer at the top. So that tells us that on both sides, you've got just about the same elevation change between here and over here. Now, obviously, the closer they get together, the more steep this angle becomes. So I can see that it's going to be a gradual, and then there's a large increase here. So I'm going to get in game and see what that looks like. And if I look from the road, I'll show my position on the map here in a second. There's gradual, and then it goes very steep up to the top of the mountain. Now I'm going to look at the map again. That's basically no change in elevation here. Gradual, steep up into a mountain. And then there's the peak. So you have a peak here and 2 here. Typically, peaks of mountains will have a complete encirclement of these lines, and they'll also be marked with these little triangles and how high up they are off sea level, if you zoom in enough. But if you zoom back out, you're not really going to see that. You're just going to see small little triangles to reference a peak of a mountain. Now for hills, they don't have the peaks. The peaks only correlate with mountain ranges. So the Western Heights, Castle Ridge, Ore Ridge, and Beacon Ridge. The only mountain ranges on Evron are going to be found in this portion of the map. So if you ever spawn in and see a full-size mountain like this, you know kind of where you are from the map reading and the map knowledge that you've gained. And since we're on the topic of elevation, we're going to go over a couple of hills. Cavalry Hill is sometimes called Hamburger Hill because it's very easy to hold a defensive position at the top of a hill or at the higher elevation. Another very important hillside will be this one west of coastal base Chotain. You can snipe into Chotain and do some real damage on this site from these woods. And again, you can tell this is a hillside because there's the elevation lines, and you can tell how steep it is by how close they are together. Now, knowing the exact names of the hills and such isn't really going to help you navigate too much unless you've seen that hill enough. But the most important hill in this game is Poacher's Hill. This is where the tower sits at Tower Entre Deux, and I'll explain why that's important when I do a video on conflict. But for now, the other very important strategic thing that you should keep in mind when it comes to elevation is over here is Tower Regina. Those are both tower relays that you can reset for your team in conflict. So if you need to know where at least one peak and one hill are in this entire map, it's Tower Regina's peak and Poacher's Hill over here, where Tower Entree 2 sits. Now, another very important geological feature is water. We're on an island after all, so there's going to be a lot of it. Now, for my DayZ players out there, you guys know how important a coast is when it comes to navigating. If you know your general location, you could know, hey, if I put this coast to my left, I know I'm traveling in this direction. And that also works for putting it behind you, or in front of you, or to your right. Now, coasts are very beneficial for navigation because they're very unique and very recognizable. If you put me in Camarac and had me look northwest, I could tell you exactly where I was just because I know there's this lighthouse here and I understand how the coast kind of looks over there. And while we're on the topic of lighthouses, they are extremely useful for navigation. Lighthouses were created for a reason. You can see them from a far distance and they're very recognizable. And the coast is littered with them. There's 1, 2, 3. There's 19 lighthouses and the coasts are typically very recognizable. So you could really just hug the coast and navigate, but that takes way too darn long if you're trying to get from Morton to Gravette. However, if we're utilizing water to navigate, you could always use rivers and lakes. They're less prominent, but if you keep an eye out and make sure that you're traveling across them or beside them, you can get a more accurate idea of where you are while you're navigating. And aside from that, if you're in an area where you can see an island off the coast, you can use that to perform a resection to find where you are by using the compass and protractor. If you don't want to get that specific, as most people don't, you can just look at it and say, oh, that's in that direction of me, I must be over here. Or if it's directly east of you, I must be here. If you're using Isle d'Argent as a landmark to help you navigate. Now, we've talked enough about the sea. Let's get back to land. And something I completely spaced out yesterday when I was recording was forests and trees. Forests and trees are going to be shown on the map by a green coloration on the map. And where there's a lack of trees or a lack of a forest, it's just going to be gray. You can use the outskirts of forests and marked tree locations to navigate. So if you're coming up on this dirt road north by northwest here, and you could say, okay, right when the trees touch on the left side, take a right at the fork. So then once those trees get close to you, you know that's when you're taking your right and you're going into the forest. I use trees and the outskirts of woods to navigate a lot more than I do other things, to be honest, especially if you're going somewhere there's not roads or other landmarks. And that sums up the major geographical formations and landmarks. Now I'm going to talk about roads and paths. Roads and paths may seem super simple, but it's always good to go over it anyways for anybody who hasn't driven a car before or used Google Maps or Apple Maps if you're weird like that. Now, in this game, there are 3 types of roads and 1 type of path. The first type of road I'm going to talk about is what I'm going to call a highway, and that is going to be a thick, dark yellow line here. The second type of road is a standard road, I'll call it, and that's going to be a lighter yellow and a little bit skinnier path like this one here. Now, the third type of road is a dirt road, and that's going to be a brown and skinny path just like this one right here. Now, the one type of path that's in this game is going to be a walk path, and that's going to be represented by a dashed line. Now, to show you what all of these would typically look like, I'm going to go to that spot and show you a visual representation rather than just looking at a map. This is a highway. They're 2 lanes wide, and they typically have road markings on them, painted on them. This is what I would call a regular road, which is just a unpainted, typically skinnier road, and you can fit 2 lanes on it, but I'll just call it 1 lane. The third type of road is a dirt road, and that's going to have tire marks in it, and it's obviously going to be dirt. Now, the walk paths are going to be harder to find, but they're small footpaths, only enough size for about 1 person, and they look like this one here. It's important to know the road type if you are to navigate for a friend that's driving, And if somebody's navigating for you, it's good that you know these road types for if you need to know you're taking a left turn on a dirt road, you're not taking a left turn on a paved road. Now, the final thing I'm going to talk about when it comes to roads, as I guess I'll call it a road because it's paved, but this airfield here, it's a gray and it's very large, so you'll know it when you see it. Now, I would like to make a note that when it comes to navigating while driving, you need to understand the roads. So this is a fork where it goes in two different directions. If you're coming from here, this would be a T. So let's say I'm coming through Levy and I want to go to Coastal Base Morton. I say, keep going straight, take a left at the fork. So then I would take a left at this fork and go towards that way. If I was coming up here and wanted to go to Levy, I would come to this T. Before we get to that point, I would tell my driver, once you hit a T, take a right and you'll be going towards Levy. And then he would know, or I would know, hit the T, take a right, we're in Levy. All right, so now we've covered geological landmarks. We've covered roads. The only thing that's next is man-made locations. This map is littered with man-made locations. If it's a gray square or rectangle like this one or these, it's a building. And quick note for when it comes to buildings with the man-made landmarks is identifying a bundle of buildings with a town or city is going to be where identifying buildings is going to come into play. Now, if you're running through a field and you can find these buildings, that's going to be useful too, but knowing that you're coming up on Chautaine when it's within sight is going to be far more useful than knowing where this farm is. And with knowing those towns, Saint Pierre, Levy, Chautaine, Morton, Lamenton, Saint Philippe, and technically Gravette all have military installations or military bases. And aside from the military bases, you have Entrée-Deux over here, which has a radio relay. And then you also have Regina down here, which also has a radio relay up here. So that's how you can use buildings to get a better idea of where you are, because you're not just looking at the one building, you're looking at the bundle of buildings. Now, there are special types of buildings too, like churches. Those are going to be represented on the map with this logo right here. The circle with a cross on the top, that is going to be a church. This is going to be the church in Chautaine. And just to show you on the map again, this is what it looks like. And while I'm speaking on churches, the solid circle with the cross on top, so this black dot with a cross on top of it, is going to represent a graveyard. Now, aside from buildings, one of the most important things that you could utilize while navigating are power lines. Power lines are all over the map, and you can use those to navigate rather than roads, rather than landmarks, because you know the path they're going, and typically they follow roads, but sometimes they cut through large open areas and get you to where you're going faster. And there's two types of power lines. There's big dots with thicker lines, which are going to be larger power lines. And then you've got these smaller dots with a skinnier line, and those are going to be the smaller ones. Now, the larger power lines are much taller and much larger, so they're easier to see and easier to follow, while the smaller power lines are typically wooden posts and have 3 lines on them. And they're a little bit more difficult to follow, but there are more of them and they're more webbed out into cities and towns, whereas these big ones act as highways, essentially. Another man-made landmark that can be utilized very heavily if you're on foot will be these T's on the map, and those T's represent the hunting shacks. Now, there's 3 more man-made landmarks I want to go over, but stick with me. They're all really important, and they will definitely help you for navigating this map. The next one I'm going to talk about are towers. Towers are represented on the map by this square with a T and another line under that T. I don't even know what the hell to call that, but this tower here looks like this in game. Towers are all over this map. They're typically at higher points, so tops of hills, peaks of mountains, things like that. Those are typically very useful to get your general idea of your location, because you can look, see a tower, and know your relation to that landmark. The next man-made landmark that is represented on the map is going to be gas stations. Gas stations are represented by this little gas pump symbol right here. Gas stations are very handy to use as a navigation tool because while you're driving to a location, you can see them very easily from the road. They're typically bright red, and you can see them from a mile away. Now, the final man-made landmark that I want to speak on is going to be bridges. Bridges are going to be very useful when you're driving because you 100% know when you're going over one, and you can correlate that bridge with what it looks like on the map. And bridges are represented on the map by two black lines on the outside of the road. So whichever road that may be, if there's two black lines parallel with each other on either side of the road, that's going to be a bridge. Now, I didn't go over every single little thing, but I did go over a lot. I tried to go over just the essentials / the most useful things that you're going to use while you're navigating, because I'm trying not to give useless information here. And let's be honest here, nobody's saying I'm going across Bonfire Hill making a move onto Morton. You don't need to know the name specifically of every little thing on this map, but knowing where you're going and where you're coming from is going to be the two most effective things for you. If you enjoyed this video and liked what you watched, feel free to leave a like on the video and give me a subscribe. I'm planning on doing a lot of tutorials for this game because there are some things that might need explaining and some people might have questions. So I'm looking to answer some questions primarily with newer players, but I'll get into more technical stuff as I keep making these videos. Now, I recorded this whole video on 0 hours of sleep, so I maybe once or twice said geological instead of geographical, or I might have forgot something. So if I did forget something, let me know. Or if you want to count the number of times that I said geological instead of geographical or said something wrong, comment down below how many times I did, because I'm not going through and looking at every single mistake of mine again. But yes, either way, if you made it this far, thank you very much for watching all of this, and drop a like, leave a subscribe, and leave a comment, and you just say something, I guess. Any form of engagement is amazing, and I appreciate it so much. So thank you for watching this far if you did, and until the next one. Peace!